The mud bubbled under my feet as if the earth itself screamed in pain. Around me, the young Orishas shouted words that cut through the air like sharp blades, their powers clashing in explosions of light and fury that violently stirred the swamp waters. Ogum wielded his sword with the rage of 1,000 battles, while Iansam made the winds howl like tormented souls. Zangos thundered threats that echoed through the skies, and I just breathed and remembered when this same ground was just a sigh in the womb of the cosmos, when the first tears of creation mixed with the clay that they now trampled with such fury. My fingers, wrinkled by the weight of countless eras, sank into the warm mud, and I felt the pulse of the world's memory there, every birth, every death, every mistake repeating in infinite cycles. "Stop!" My voice came out like a silent thunder carrying the weight of all eras. "You will destroy everything we've taken eternities to build." And then, in the silence that followed, I began to tell the story that only I knew, the story of how we almost lost everything once, and how true wisdom sometimes means choosing the hardest path. I am Nana, the ancestral mother, the one who guards in the folds of her skin the memories of the first sigh of creation. My home is the swamps, where life and death dance in eternal harmony, where the mud that sustains the deepest roots also embraces the bodies that return to the earth's womb. When the other Orishas were still learning to shape their powers, I already carried in my womb the wisdom of the primordial waters. Today, I want to share with you a story that forever changed the destiny of our sacred land, a story that few know, but that all should hear, especially those who, like me, feel the weight of responsibility on their shoulders and wonder if their decisions really make a difference in the great fabric of existence. It was in a time when the earth was still young, when the Orishas discovered their domains and tested the limits of their powers. I was already ancient then, not ancient in years, but ancient in essence, carrying in my soul the memories of when everything was just potential, when life was just a dream in Olodumare's eyes. In those days, I lived in the depths of the sacred swamps, where the dark waters reflected not only the sky, but also the shadows of what was and what could be. My dwelling extended among the intertwined roots of the ancestral mangroves, trees that seemed to have been born already old, with twisted trunks that told stories of resistance and adaptation. It was there, among the lotus flowers that bloomed on the muddy surface, that I spent my days shaping the primordial clay, giving form to the first seeds of life. Each handful of mud that passed through my hands carried the potential to become something extraordinary, a bird, a tree, a river, a mountain. But it also carried the mark of impermanence, the certainty that everything that is born must one day return to dust. I remember how my fingers trembled the first times I shaped a form of life. It wasn't fear, but reverence. Reverence for the responsibility of starting something that would have its own journey, its own loves and pains, its own discoveries and farewells. Each creation was an act of faith, a leap into the unknown. My skin, dark as fertile earth, absorbed the sun's rays filtering through the foliage, and I felt growing within me a deep understanding of the cycles of existence. I observed how plants were born, grew, bloomed and died, only to be reborn in different forms. I saw how insects emerged from the waters, danced their ephemeral dance under the sun, and returned to the mud to nourish new lives. That was my school, my cosmic university. Each day brought lessons on patience, on acceptance, on the beauty that exists in the process of transformation. I learned that true wisdom is not in avoiding pain, but in understanding its role in the great cycle of life. I learned that sometimes things must be allowed to die so they can be reborn stronger. But not all Orishas understood these lessons. Many were young in spirit, full of energy and impatience. They saw in their powers the possibility to shape the world according to their wills, without considering the deep consequences of their actions. It was like watching children play with fire, fascinated by the beauty of the flames without realizing they could burn down the entire forest. It was on one of those afternoons, when the sun set, tinting the swamp waters with gold and red, that I felt the first disturbance, a vibration in the air, subtle as a butterfly's wing beat, but it made my ancestral heart contract with worry. It was the omen of something coming, something that would test not only my wisdom, but the Orishas' very ability to coexist in harmony. I closed my eyes and let my consciousness expand. Feeling the invisible threads that connect all living beings, I perceived tensions growing, prides clashing, vanities feeding each other until they became hungry monsters. The young Orishas were preparing for something that could destroy everything we had built together. And then, like an echo from the depths of time, I heard Olodumare's voice whisper in my ear, "Nana, my ancestral daughter, the time has come to show that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to preserve." I opened my eyes and saw that the swamp waters had become a perfect mirror, reflecting not the sky, but visions of what was to come. I saw the Orishas clashing. I saw the earth cracking under the force of their powers. I saw rivers drying up and forests burning. I also saw something more terrible. I saw the possibility that, in their fury, they would completely forget why they had been created. It was time to act, but how? How to make young gods understand truths that only time and experience can teach. How to show that sometimes the greatest victory is won without fighting. How to teach that true wisdom does not shout, but whispers. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of every era I had witnessed. My feet sank into the warm mud, and I felt once more the pulse of the earth, the ancestral rhythm that connects all things. I knew the journey I was about to begin would be the hardest of all, for it would require of me something that had always been my greatest difficulty: intervening in the course of events without imposing my will. The night breeze brought to me the smell of the approaching storm, not just a storm of rain and wind, but a storm of destinies, of choices that would forever mark the future of our sacred land. And I, Nana, the guardian of ancestral memories, would have to find a way to guide my Orixa children through this turmoil without them losing their own essence in the process. May this story touch the hearts of you who listen to me, especially those who sometimes feel overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility. Sometimes, being wise means accepting that we cannot control everything, but we can influence what really matters. Sometimes the greatest strength we possess is the ability to wait for the right moment to act. If this journey is awakening something in your heart, let it germinate like a seed in fertile soil. Ancestral wisdom has no hurry, but it has a destiny. The first gust of wind brought with it more than the smell of rain. It brought the echo of raised voices, the clang of metal against metal, and something that made my ancestral heart contract, the sound of the earth groaning under the weight of uncontrolled powers. It was as if the world itself was calling for help, and I, in my dwelling of mud and roots, felt every vibration like a stab in the Weihianing. Soul, I didn't need to leave my swamp to know what was happening. The waters around me became windows to the outside world, reflecting scenes unfolding leagues away. I saw Ogum, my son of iron and war, with eyes burning with righteous fury, wielding his sword as if it were the only truth left in the world. On the other side, Oxosi, the hunter of green paths, tensed his bow with the precision of one who never misses. But this time his prey was not a forest animal, it was his own brother. How did we get to this point? The question echoed in my mind as I watched the deadly dance unfolding before my eyes. I remembered when they were just cosmic children, playing among the clouds, discovering their gifts with the innocent joy of those who don't yet know the weight of responsibility. Ogum shaped small swords of light, laughing when they fell apart in his hands. Oxosi chased golden butterflies through the sky, learning to measure distances with his heart. Now, those same powers that once brought only joy clashed with the violence of 1,000 storms. Ogum's sword sliced the air, leaving trails of fire, while Oxosi's arrows flew like shooting stars, each carrying the intent to wound, to dominate, to prove superiority. But the true pain was not in what I saw, it was in what I felt. Through the invisible threads that connect all living beings, I perceived the anguish motivating every blow, every dodge, every war cry. Ogum fought not out of malice, but out of wounded love, out of the perception that his efforts to protect the earth were not recognized. Oxosi attacked not out of hate, but out of a desperate need to prove that his connection to nature was as valuable as the brute force of Ion. It was like watching two sons fight for their mother's attention, without realizing that their fight was shattering her heart into 1,000 pieces. But that was just the beginning. Like waves that amplify when they hit obstacles, the conflict spread. Iansa, Lady of Winds and Storms, saw in the dispute an opportunity to show that the elements are superior to the Orixas' creations. Her winds began to blow with growing fury, uprooting century-old trees and making rivers change course. Zango, proud lord of thunder, interpreted his companions' winds as a challenge to his authority over the skies, and responded with lightning that split mountains. Each new Orixa joining the conflict brought not only their power, but also their particular pain, their specific need to be seen, understood, valued. It was as if all the misunderstandings accumulated over eras had found a release valve, and now everything gushed out at once, without control, without direction, without purpose beyond the desperate need to scream one's own existence. I closed my eyes and dove deeper into the ancestral memories. I searched for precedents, similar situations that could guide me, and there, in the deepest folds of time, I found echoes of other eras, other conflicts, other tragedies that could have been avoided if someone had had the courage to intervene at the right moment. I saw the first great drought, when the water Orixas quarreled among themselves and forgot their primordial function. I saw the great fire that nearly consumed all the forests, when the fire guardians let themselves be carried away by vanity. I saw the era of eternal darkness, when the light Orixas refused to leave their dwellings out of wounded pride. With each memory my heart tightened more, not from the pain of the past, but from the clear perception that we were about to repeat the same mistakes. History has its cycles, and those who do not learn from the past are doomed to relive it in increasingly tragic versions. But I also found, in those memories, something that gave me hope. I found the recollection of other interventions, other mediations, other moments when ancestral wisdom managed to calm tempers and restore harmony, not through force, not through imposition, but through something much more powerful, the ability to make each one remember their true nature. I opened my eyes and saw that the conflict had escalated even further. Iamanja, mother of the seas, had joined the dispute, making the ocean waters rise in gigantic waves that threatened to swallow entire continents. Oxum, queen of the rivers, responded by making her golden waters churn in furious whirlpools. Even Exu, the guardian of paths, had taken sides, closing roads and confusing directions, as if he wanted everyone to get lost forever. It was time to act, but how? How to make furious gods stop fighting? How to convince cosmic powers to listen to the voice of reason when their hearts were consumed by the passion of combat? I rose from my contemplative position and felt the familiar mud under my feet. Each step I took toward the swamp's surface was a step into the unknown. I, who had always been the silent advisor, the wise observer, would have to expose myself, would have to risk my own authority to save those I loved. When I emerged completely from the waters, I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders like never before. The air around me vibrated with the energy of the distant conflict, and I knew that every second of hesitation could mean irreversible destruction. But I also knew that a hasty intervention could make everything worse. I needed a plan, not a war plan, but a peace plan. I needed to find a way to touch the heart of each Orixa involved in the conflict, to make each one remember not just their power, but their purpose. I needed to find the right words, the right moment, the right approach. I began to walk the muddy paths that connected my swamp to the rest of the world. Each step left deep marks in the mud, but also made small flowers sprout, as if the earth itself responded to my determination with signs of hope. As I walked, I felt the presence of other beings, not Orixas, But the oldest creatures of creation, the spirits of the first trees, the souls of the first rivers, the essences of the first winds, they too were worried. They too felt that something fundamental was being threatened. "Nana," whispered a voice that seemed to come from the soil itself. "Are you really going to try to stop them?" "I won't try to stop them," I replied, feeling certainty grow in my chest. "I will help them find themselves." And then, as if the earth itself approved my decision, I felt an ancient force rise from the depths. It wasn't my force. It was the force of all mothers who had ever faced conflicting sons, of all sages who had tried to mediate impossible disputes, of all hearts that had chosen love over victory. As I approached the battlefield, the vibrations of the conflict became more intense. The air itself seemed to scream, and I felt each explosion of power like a stab in my ancestral soul. But I also felt something more. I felt that my time had come, that all the wisdom accumulated over eras would serve for this specific moment. I reached the top of a hill and saw the battlefield for the first time with my own eyes. It was much worse than the visions had shown. The earth was cracked, the trees burned, the rivers ran red, and at the center of it all, my Orishas children danced a dance of destruction that made the cosmos itself tremble. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with the tension-charged air, and began to descend the hill toward the eye of the storm. I knew that when I got there, I would have to do something I had never done before, put my own ancestral authority at risk to save those I loved. But before reaching the battlefield, I needed to prepare. I needed to find within myself not only the wisdom of the ancients, but also the courage of the young. I needed to be, at the same time, the mother who protects and the warrior who fights, but a warrior whose only weapons are love and understanding. Each step brought me closer to the moment that would define the destiny of our sacred land, and I walked, firm and determined, carrying in my hands not swords or arrows, but something much more powerful, the hope that it was still possible to awaken the best in every heart, even in the darkest moments. The storm of prides reached its peak, and Nanam prepares for the most difficult trial of her ancestral existence. What will happen when the wisdom of the ancients confronts the fury of the young? The answer is near, and it may determine the destiny of all worlds. Continue with me on this journey, for the greatest lessons often emerge from the most challenging moments. When I finally arrived at the battlefield, the world around me had transformed into a distorted reflection of the original creation. The sky bled colors that should never exist. The earth groaned under wounds that cut deeper than any sword, and the air vibrated with an energy so chaotic that even the oldest spirits had retreated to their primordial dwellings, waiting for the storm to pass. My Orishas children were at the center of the hurricane, each lost in their own fury, each convinced that their cause was the only just one. Ogum, with his sword raised to the sky, looked like a statue of incandescent bronze, his muscles tensed by the accumulated rage of 1,000 battles. Oxosi danced among the burning trees, his fluid movements contrasting with the destruction his arrows caused. Yansa spun at the center of a tornado she herself had created, her hair mingling with the winds as if made of the same tempestuous essence. But it was when I saw Zango that my ancestral heart nearly shattered. My son of thunder was suspended in the air, surrounded by lightning that did not illuminate but darkened everything around him. His eyes, which once shone with the wisdom of justice, now burned only with the desire to prove his superiority. It was like seeing a king who had lost his kingdom and now fought only to prove he was still worthy of a crown no one wanted to give him any more. I stopped at the edge of the battlefield, feeling the weight of every decision I had made to get there. I knew that one wrong step could not only fail to resolve the conflict, but also turn me into another target of the unleashed fury. But I also knew there was no more time for hesitation. I closed my eyes and dove into the deepest memories I possessed. Not memories of past conflicts, but memories of love. I remembered when each of these Orishas was born, the moment their powers first manifested, the pure joy I felt when I understood that each brought a unique part of the divine essence. I remembered Ogum as a child, shaping his first sword with trembling hands, not out of desire for war, but out of love for protection. I remembered Oxosi young, discovering he could communicate with the forest animals, laughing with joy when a little bird landed on his finger for the first time. I remembered Iansa as a teenager, learning to dance with the winds, spinning among the clouds with the innocence of one who doesn't yet know the weight of responsibility. These memories became my strength, not the strength to fight, but the strength to love unconditionally, even when love seemed impossible. I opened my eyes and began walking toward the center of the conflict. With each step, I felt the earth responding to my presence. The mud under my feet spread in concentric waves, creating small islands of peace amid the chaos. Flowers bloomed where I stepped, not ordinary flowers, but flowers of memory, each carrying in its petals the recollection of a shared moment of joy. Ogum was the first to notice me. His sword, about to slice the air toward Oxosi, hesitated mid-motion. For an instant, I saw in his eyes not the warrior's fury, but the confusion of a child who doesn't understand why he's being scolded. "Nana!" His voice came out hoarse, laden with a pain that transcended the physical battle. "You shouldn't be here. This is something that needs to be resolved." "I know, my son," I replied, continuing to walk toward him. "I know it needs to be resolved, but not the way you're trying." Oxosi lowered his bow, and I saw his hands trembling, not from fear, but from emotional exhaustion. "Nana, he doesn't understand. He doesn't see that brute force isn't the only way to protect our land." "And you don't understand," Ogum retorted, but his voice had already lost some of its fury. "That without the strength of iron, all your forests will be destroyed by enemies." It was exactly what I expected. Beneath the anger, there was fear. Fear of not being understood. Fear of not being valued. Fear that their unique contribution to the cosmos would be ignored or belittled. I kept walking until I was between the two, and then did something none of them expected. I sat on the ground right there in the middle of the battlefield and began shaping small figures with the mud that had formed around me. "What are you doing?" Iansa asked, slowing her winds. "I'm remembering," I replied without lifting my eyes from the clay in my hands. "I'm remembering when you were little, and I taught you to shape your first creations." I shaped a small mud sword and extended it to Ogum. "Do you remember the first time you made a sword, my son? Not to harm, but to protect a flower that was being trampled." Ogum looked at the small mud sword, and I saw his features soften. I remember. It was a blue flower, and there was a strong wind threatening to uproot it. And you created a small iron shield to protect it," I continued, now shaping a small bow. "Oxosi, do you remember what you did when you saw your brother's sword?" Oxosi approached slowly, as if hypnotized by the memory. I created arrows that, when shot, turned into stakes to support the flower. We worked together." "You worked together," I repeated, feeling the first tears well up in my eyes. Two different powers, two different methods, but one single purpose: to protect something beautiful and fragile. I then shaped a small wind figure, ethereal and delicate. "Iansa, do you remember how your winds helped pollinate that flower, spreading its seeds throughout the valley?" Iansa landed on the ground, her winds calming completely. "I remember." "And Zango? Zango created rain so the seeds could sprout." I looked at Zango, who was still floating in the air, but whose lightning had diminished to a soft glow. "Do you remember, my son of thunder? Do you remember how your rain made an entire field of blue flowers bloom?" Zango descended slowly, his feet touching the ground with a gentleness that contrasted with all the previous fury. "I remember. All the flowers were different, but all were beautiful." "Yes," I whispered, now shaping a small representation of all of us together. All different, all unique, all essential, each contributing with its own beauty to the larger garden. The silence that followed was not the silence of fear or tension, but the silence of understanding. One by one, my Oriksa children approached, sitting around me in the mud that had become sacred by the presence of our shared memories. "But mother," Ogum said, his voice now laden with vulnerability, "I feel that my strength is not appreciated. I feel they see only the destruction I can cause, not the protection I offer. And I feel that my connection to nature is seen as weakness. Oxosi added, as if being kind were useless. I feel that my intensity scares others, Ian-san confessed, as if loving passionately were a flaw. And I feel that my justice is interpreted as tyranny, Zango completed, as if wanting order were wanting control. I looked at each of them, these magnificent beings who had lost themselves in their own insecurities, and felt my heart expand with a love that transcended any cosmic power. My children, I said, my voice carrying all the tenderness I had accumulated over eras. You have forgotten the most important lesson that time taught me. You have forgotten that you do not exist to be understood by others, but to be faithful to your own essence. I shaped another figure in the clay, this time a representation of the earth itself. The earth does not apologize for being solid. The water does not justify itself for being fluid. The fire does not shame itself for being hot. Each element simply is, and it is in the harmony of that diversity that life flourishes. Ogum, your strength is sacred not because others appreciate it, but because it springs from true love for protection. Oxosi, your kindness is power because it is born from a deep understanding of life. Iansa, your passion is a gift because it moves the world forward. Zango, your justice is light because it illuminates the path for all. I rose slowly, feeling the flow of ancestral wisdom through me. But when you fight each other, when you try to prove you are superior to one another, you deny the very essence that makes you unique. You become caricatures of yourselves, distorted shadows of what you truly are. One by one they rose too, and I saw in their eyes something that had been absent throughout the conflict. Peace. Not the peace of resignation, but the peace of understanding. Mother, Ogum said, extending his hand to Oxosi. I'm sorry. Me too, Oxosi replied, accepting his brother's hand. I forgot that we are different faces of the same protection. Iansa and Zango looked at each other, and I saw a silent communication pass between them, full of love and mutual respect. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, they began to dance together, their powers harmonizing in a symphony of wind and thunder that healed the earth's wounds. Gradually, other Orishas began to arrive. Yemanja emerged from the calmed seas, Oxum descended from her golden mountains, Exu reopened the paths. Each brought not only their power, but also their renewed understanding that true strength lies in complementarity, not competition. And there, on that field that had been the stage of so much destruction, I witnessed something that filled me with indescribable joy. I saw my Orixa children working together to heal the wounds they had caused. I saw Ogum using his strength to rebuild, Oxosi calling the animals back to the forest, Iansa bringing fresh winds to clean the air, Zango creating gentle rains to nourish the wounded. Earth, as I watched this transformation, I felt a familiar presence at my side. It was Olodumare, the Creator, who had descended to witness the rebirth of harmony. Nana, his voice echoed in my heart. You have done something I could not have done. You taught them not through commands, but through love, not through power, but through understanding. I merely reminded them of who they truly are, I replied, feeling a deep humility. Sometimes wisdom is not in knowing all the answers, but in asking the right questions. And what was the right question? Olodumare asked, though I knew he already knew the answer. It wasn't a question I asked, I replied, smiling as I watched my children heal the world. It was a question each of them asked themselves. Who am I when I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone? Days passed, and the earth healed completely. More than that, it became more beautiful than before, as if the healing process had added new layers of meaning to its beauty. The scars turned into rivers, the holes into lakes, and where there had been only destruction, now grew a diversity of life that none of us had imagined possible. But the true transformation happened in the hearts. My Orixa children learned something that had taken me eras to understand, that true strength is not in being invincible, but in being vulnerable enough to love and be loved. That wisdom is not in having all the answers, but in being willing to ask the difficult questions. That harmony is born not from uniformity, but from the celebration of differences. And I, Nana, the ancestral mother of the swamps, learned something new too. I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is not solving others' problems, but helping them find their own solutions. I learned that true wisdom is not a possession, but a river that flows constantly, always changing, always growing, always renewing. Today, when I look at the world we almost lost and managed to save, I see not only the beauty of creation, but the beauty of redemption. I see that even the most destructive conflicts can transform into opportunities for growth if faced with love and understanding. And when I feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders, I remember this story. I remember that I am not alone, that each of us has a unique role to play in the great symphony of existence. I remember that true wisdom is not an individual conquest, but a shared gift. You who listen to me, who have accompanied this journey to the end, take this truth with you. In every conflict you face, in every moment of pain you cross, in every crisis that challenges you, there is an opportunity for rediscovery. There is a chance to remember who you really are, beneath all the masks and defenses. Ancestral wisdom is not a treasure hidden in ancient temples. It pulses in every heart that chooses love over fear, understanding over judgment, union over division. It lives in every person who decides to extend a hand instead of raising closed fists. May this story be a seed in your hearts, germinating in moments of difficulty, blooming in acts of compassion, fructifying in healed relationships and transformed worlds. And remember, sometimes the greatest wisdom is simply sitting in the mud of life, shaping small figures of hope with your hands, and reminding yourselves and others of who we really are when we stop fighting and start loving. Thus ends the journey of Nana, the ancestral mother who taught us that true strength lies in vulnerability, true wisdom in humility, and true victory in the ability to transform conflicts into opportunities for growth. May this story continue living in your hearts, inspiring every step you take toward a more compassionate and understanding world. May ancestral wisdom guide your paths, and may the memory of love always be stronger than the temptation of war. Akse.